Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. In today's episode, we speak with Eric Robinson, who discusses how he's been introducing films to his 4 children that age and range from 2.5 to 13. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and I'm here today with guest Eric Robinson, who's currently the partner and EVP of Production and Development at the Gotham Group, previously at Miramax and the Weinstein Company, where I had the honor of being Eric's assistant for, maybe 2 years in there.
Sounds about right.
Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is really cool.
Thank you. And before getting on this video, it must be like maybe 15 years since we've seen each other.
That is insane. I've been following you, though, on social media, so it feels like we never left.
Exactly. My first question for you is, what is your first memory of seeing a movie?
So my first memory of seeing a movie, there are 2 that are, for me, the earliest seminal movie-going experiences. The first being Annie, the Albert Finney Annie, and I remember absolutely loving it. And I remember I couldn't have been more than 3. And I remember driving home from the movie singing Tomorrow at the top of my lungs in the backseat of the car, and my mom cracking up. And I loved that movie. Interestingly enough, my wife is like an Annie fanatic, which is there's some weird universality in that. The other being E.T., which I think I was 4 when that came out. And I remember that was the first time that my parents allowed me to be in charge of holding the giant tub of popcorn in the theater. We all were there. Me, my mom, my dad, my big brother, and my big sister. I was the baby. And the scene when Elliot first encounters E.T. in the cornfield and he jumps out at him, I freaked out and threw my popcorn all over the man in front of us. So those are my 2 earliest memories. And then I think we grew up at the time of video stores. So I spent an obscene amount of time at Blockbuster. And before there was Blockbuster, the only way you could get a video was the pharmacy, Caliber Pharmacy in Hewlett, New York. And the first movie I remember renting from there, and I must have made my mom rent that movie at least a dozen times, was Romancing the Stone. It became another very seminal kind of movie for me.
What was the ritual in your family seeing movies, between going to the theater or seeing them at home?
We would go to the movies together quite often. More often than not, it was HBO and renting movies constantly. I remember one of the last times I think I was happy to go to a movie theater with my parents was Dirty Dancing, and I felt very uncomfortable. So I think that might have been one of the last times I saw a movie in a theater with my parents. We would very often go to Blockbuster, rent a movie, pick up dinner, go home and watch a movie. Most of the time then, once my movie loving, my mom loved movies, but she more than that loved celebrity culture and loved like awards shows. So she would let me stay up late to watch the Oscars with her. The ritual soon became just me renting movies for me and then watching them myself.
So you watched a lot of movies alone?
Alone or with my friends. I'd have sleepovers and we would rent movies. And then it got to the point where I was so movie obsessed, as was another friend of mine, that we would go to Blockbuster and ask them for the standees. That if a standee was on its way out to the trash, we would ask them for it. So my childhood bedroom had 4 or 5 giant cardboard standees in it. There was not much room for anything else, but it was not always movies that I had any remote connection to. I remember I had a standee for the movie Mac and Me, which is the movie that is now famous for Paul Rudd consistently using it as a running gag on Conan. That every time he shows up on Conan, he's going to show a clip of his most recent movie, but it's always the same clip from Mac and Me, which is a horrible E.T. ripoff. And I had that in my room, and I'm like, I don't even know what friggin' movie this is, but it looked ridiculous. So yeah, my ritual went from, especially when my big brother and big sister left the house, and I was an only child at that point, basically. It just turned into me watching a lot of movies with either myself or my friends.
And was there a point when you knew that filmmaking was a craft?
That's a really good question. Like when I realized, oh, this is something that people do. Yeah. But the first entry point for me, I never really understood I knew who filmmakers were. Like I remember going to see like Goodfellas in the movie theater. And that was the first time that I was consciously aware of Martin Scorsese as a filmmaker. But my entry into the idea of, oh, this is something that people do was going to see Home Alone in 1990 and seeing Macaulay Culkin on screen and being like, oh, I can do that. I can act. So my entry point into that was as a short lived, never successful child actor. Went on auditions. I found myself an agent. I literally opened up the yellow pages one day and found myself an agent, like a child agent, fresh faces on Long Island, and got headshots. And I actually got, when I was like 14, maybe 14 or 15, like I had a speaking extra role in a really bad indie movie that never got distribution. And every audition I would go on, I was always up against the kid who played Chip in Kate and Alley, that sitcom. So every time I would go in and do it, at least 4 or 5 times, I was like in the elevator with Chip from Kate and Alley. And I'm like, oh, I'm not getting this role. And I didn't. So I gave it up.
When you gave up acting, did it change your feeling towards movies?
No, I gave it up because, frankly, like being a teenager and having to leave like lacrosse practice to go into the city for an audition, once kids started calling me Hollywood, I was like, yeah, I don't really need being one of two Jews on the football team. I don't need this added bonus of something to get picked on for. So and especially it wasn't proving successful. So I ended up doing all like the stage plays and stuff at school. But by that point, like Tarantino was coming onto the scene with Reservoir Dogs and True Romance and even Natural Born Killers, which he like wrote, but I think took his name off of. And then seeing Pulp Fiction in the theater like totally blew my mind. It diverted me into a different direction. And then one of my best friends and we used to do, I think so many kids did this. I know my wife did, but we would record on a tape deck these little sketches. It was like a podcast, but in 1990 and not very good.
It was our version of TikTok.
It was our version of on a tape cassette. And they were really funny, at least to our 14-year-old ridiculous brains. But that, once my parents got a camcorder, that made the leap to like, we were Jackass before there was Jackass. Like we were pulling pranks in public and we were making little sketches and short films. And so it was like, even then I was like, producing because like I would come up with the ideas of the sketches that we would do and then my friend Scott would kind of write them and then I would write them and then we would act in them and they were really bad but we thought they were the funniest thing on earth. So that led me to being like, oh, maybe this is something I can actually try to do. And I went to film school in BU where I thought I was going to be a writer, but I completely lacked the discipline.
I'm going to take a step back a little bit to your pursuit of acting. Because I know even though you took it by the reins, it seems like your parents must have been pretty supportive to help you get the headshots. And so how was that your parents' role in all of these pieces?
I think my mom loved it. My mom she didn't work. She raised 3 kids. That's the hardest job on the planet. So she loved that I was passionate about something. And I was pretty good. I was always the leads in the school plays and at camp and stuff, musical and otherwise. So I think she loved the idea of driving me into the city and being with me and going out for lunch and taking me to auditions. And she would run lines with me on the way. I remember I was trying out I had an audition for Lost in Yonkers, which was a short-lived TV show. I think it was a movie or it was a play. And I had to sing Que Sera, Sera in the audition. God, I haven't thought about this in a long time. And I remember I was like, I've never heard this song before. I don't know what this is. And so driving to the city, she taught me how to sing it. So we were like singing Que Sera, Sera together on the way into the city to this audition. And I remember driving through the Midtown Tunnel singing it at the top of my lungs in the car. But yeah, my mom, they both loved it. They were both super supportive, but my mom was definitely, she loved the idea of being a stage mom, even though it didn't really take off.
Well, she was the right kind of stage mom because she let you move on when you were no longer
Exactly. She
into
was like,
it.
I get it. I get it.
My last question in this series is about how you developed your taste.
That's a good question. I think a lot of it had to do with I was obsessed with horror films in like seventh grade. And that kind of opened my eyes to films that were not necessarily mainstream movies. I loved Back to the Future and I loved Star Wars and I loved Superman. And I would devour as much like commercially pop movies as I could. But then I think the power of a good story and a well crafted movie in the hands of a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino specifically, I think really opened my eyes to like, oh, not everything needs to be these big blockbusters. There could be really interesting movies. And then I remember, I think it was like the only time I actually sat with my dad and watched a movie was, and just the two of us, we watched the movie Omega Man with Charlton Heston. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh my God, it was my first time seeing sci fi, really. And I was just
Mhm.
blown away by that. And then probably the movie that really changed my perspective and realized that there were movies before 1980 was Clockwork Orange. I remember like me and all of my friends going through Blockbuster and we're like, what is this? Like the just seeing the cover art with Malcolm McDowell and seeing what we were like, what the hell is this? And then I learned about Stanley Kubrick and then I devoured everything I could on him. That was all in around high school and then going to college and learning about Kieslowski and John Cassavetes and Louis Buñuel and watching all of these international art films that I would learn about, indie films like the Cassavetes films and all that. It was really started in high school and then really formulated in college.
Yeah, it's something a continuous thread of people who worked with me or before me and after me at the Miramax Weinstein place is that we were attracted to a certain taste of filmmaking,
Yeah,
despite like the like all of the things we know that we don't want to talk about in that world.
there's a lot that could be redacted,
You,
unfortunately, from our resumes. But
I,
yeah, when I was applying for work, when I was a senior in college and knew that I wanted to work in the industry, I didn't want to leave New York. I applied to Miramax and I applied to New Line and October Films and companies that don't even exist anymore, but Killer Films and Good Machine and the places that were making incredible independent films. Nothing's there in New York anymore. I guess A24 is based in New York, but carrying on that
Killer
legacy.
is Killer in LA now?
Killer is now more just like producers, like Christine Vachon and those
Mhm.
guys. I think they might be in New York. I'm not sure.
When we were working together, I think your son was about the same age as my son is now. I think
That's so
so.
funny.
Which
Yeah, he's
how old is he
13.
now? He's
He's
13.
13. Yep.
You have a
Flies.
teenager.
I have a teenager.
Um,
As of last month, I
oh
officially have a
wow.
teenager.
And now you have three other children as well. What are
I have
their ages?
I have four kids. Very tired all the time. 10-year-old son, 10 and a half year old daughter, 5 and a half year old son, 2 and a half year old son. So I'm at
Um,
this interesting stage where I have a teenager and I guess you would call it 2 and a half year old, is he a toddler, and the two in between. So to watch their tastes change and is been really interesting.
and what was the first film you showed your oldest?
I mean, it was been Robin Hood, the Disney Robin Hood, which is still like one of my favorite all time movies, just period, flat out films. I love that movie. I remember watching that. That was another early memory. I remember watching that movie on the TV and it's 6 inches from the screen. So I've shown that movie is probably kind of the first movie that all of my kids have seen. And then Cars, the Pixar movie. Hugh, my 13-year-old, was completely obsessed with that movie when he was like 2 and a half after Robin Hood. And now my 2 and a half year old, currently, it's all he wants to watch. It's Cars, just obsessed with Cars.
Would you consider your kid to be into movies? Your oldest?
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. So he he's always liked he does like movies very much. I'm trying to figure out what his taste is becoming now with four kids. And I'm the two products of a divorce, the two older ones, and then my present wife, the second Mrs. Robinson, is Hugh and I, the 13-year-old, will after bedtime, after I put the little ones to bed, we will go downstairs and watch TV or a movie. And I've been, again, trying to figure out what he likes. We went through all the Mission Impossibles. We have watched a handful of the Marvel movies together. I showed him Peacemaker, the series, which I loved and he ended up loving it, but I realized I forgot very early on how hard they are, that show. I was watching a lot of comedy with them, Blazing Saddles, and him and his sister. Blazing Saddles, we watched Police Academy, we watched Animal House. So like showing them the classic movies that I grew up with and loved. They loved Devil Wears Prada, the Adventures in Babysitting, and the Back to the Future obviously got in there. But I was listening to Mark Maron's podcast last week or two, and Karina Longworth, who's Ryan Johnson's wife, who's also has a great podcast called You Must Remember This. And she was saying on Maron how like when we were growing up, movies and cinema had so much more importance in our daily language and pop culture. Just it informed so much more. It just had more meaning than just being a popcorn movie of the week, the thing that comes and goes. And then there's the TV show that we're talking about that's hot for a month, and then you move on to the next thing. And I was like, yeah, that's so true. So I wanted to give our movie nights a little bit more purpose. And instead of randomly choosing things to watch, hey, what do you want to watch now? Let's scroll through Netflix and see what's on. So I created a film school curriculum for him. And so I made a list of filmmakers, and we just started this. So it's funny because you reached out to me like within the same time frame that I was doing this for him. And he's really excited to do it. It's funny, he's now for the first time, he's in a school play where he never would have done it, except for the teacher who's in charge of it saw something in him and said, you should try out for the play. And he ended up getting one of the leads. So he's been having play rehearsal until late, or starting this is delayed a little bit. But I made a list of filmmakers, and we're going to go in order of the film. We'll watch their first movies and then watch either movies of theirs that are of the same genre and interconnect, or move through them and see like how their storytelling changes through their movies and their body of work, and then watch movies by other filmmakers that they were either influenced by, or filmmakers that they influenced, or filmmakers that are in the same time period as each other. I'll give you the list. So it's starting with Steven Spielberg, I felt was the easiest kind of jumping off point because he's so accessible. So we started with Close Encounters, only because I knew that he was terrified of Jaws. So I didn't want to show him Jaws. And I know there's Duel that comes before it, but I started with Close Encounters because that's always been one of my favorite movies. So going from Spielberg, and then this is a random list, and I'm going to pick and choose. And I'm also going to let him choose the filmmaker and the movie a bit that he wants to watch. So Spielberg, Kubrick, Scorsese, Tarantino, Billy Wilder, Bob Fosse, Cassavetes, James Cameron, Spike Lee, the Coen brothers, Mel Brooks, Hitchcock.
I have to add some ladies. How about Agnes Varda? Yeah, Cleo from Sank to Set, 5 to 7 was the one for me that was like, oh, this is craft.
Brilliant. Yes, I definitely need to add more women filmmakers in there. I definitely need to expand. Bonnie and Clyde, Butch Cassidy, The Sting, like George Roy Hill movies, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, I need to not make him a misogynist.
But not. They're fantastic filmmakers. It's just when I watched Cleo from 5 to 7 in a cinema studies class at NYU, I loved it. And it spoke to me. It was this woman going through something, and it was somewhat absurd. It's very French New Wave. But then when I found out it was made by a woman, I was like, wait, women can do this too? Literally, because those lists are prominently the main filmmaker. Maybe, I can't even believe I'm blanking on her name, Charlie Chaplin. And oh my gosh, why am I forgetting?
Oh, like Mary Pickford?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like some of those early ones
Yes, definitely.
before women got shut out of the director's seat for a while.
Yes, for quite some time. But yeah, they really female filmmakers like Kelly Reichardt and Chloe Zhao. It's almost like a within the last 10 years have really put their stamp on
Yeah.
being so incredibly meaningful.
And a lot of I feel like female filmmakers are pretty edgy and speaking
Yeah,
about things that aren't quite appropriate for a 13-year-old boy.
yeah.
So,
I was giving him the base level history, and then yeah, that was weird. That was very weird considering everything we're talking about. My wife has my headshot
uh-huh.
on a bookshelf in here. I'm in our office, and it just fell randomly. There's no breeze. It just ran, and it was back against the wall. It just fell off the shelf. It
Oh,
was very strange.
interesting. The
Yeah,
ghost of
and my mom coming in here and knocking it off the shelf. Yeah, so that's with my eldest, really diving into a bit of history and opening his mind there. And he has seen through his grandfather, my ex-wife's dad, he's a lover of old cinema. So like he's seen like Top Hat and Picnic and Singing in the Rain, and he's seen some of those great old
Mhm.
classics. But I want to like specifically teach him about filmmakers. And then my 10 and a half year old daughter, she loves right now, she and my wife are they'll spend every night just watching the Gilmore Girls. So she's obsessed with that. She will binge and then rewatch shows like Friends and The Office. She has seen episodes of Friends, each episode probably 5 times.
She likes comedy.
She loves comedy and she is hilarious. And then my 5.5 year old, he and the 2.5 year old will sit through movies. And we've shown them Goonies and Back to the Future. He was Marty McFly for Halloween, and our 2.5 year old was Doc Brown. And they love it. Charlie, our 5 year old, loved Goonies. He's very insightful. Like he'll ask really good story questions.
Did you show him Goonies at 5?
I showed it to him earlier, but he didn't remember. So we showed it to him again like a month ago, and he loved it.
I think they age out of that one when they're a little too old, but I want my son to love that movie, so I'm like trying to figure out what age I have to do it.
Yeah, I think 5 is probably good. And then for a while, he was obsessed with Superman, with the Christopher Reeve Superman, obsessed. And some of those movies, they're never too young. And he loves villains, he loves the bad guys. He's very turned on by the bad guys. So he's seen every episode ever made of Scooby Doo because he loves the villains. He, at a point with Charlie, it's like the scarier and more dark the movie, the better. He loved the Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson Batman.
That's
Um,
scary
it's
for
scary.
5.
He loved it. And then I told him that there was a part 2, and we showed him that. And that one gets a bit dark. The one with Danny DeVito and Michelle Pfeiffer. That one gets a bit dark, but he still liked it. But he liked it. He was like, I like the other one better.
And what kind of conversations do you have with them after? Do they have life questions about the world after they see movies like that?
Hugh doesn't really yet, my 13-year-old. He'll have an opinion on stuff, but he won't really ask life questions. Charlie, on the other hand, will absolutely apply things that he has learned or picked up from movies and then use that as an analogy in something else as a comparison. Oh, it's like this or like that. But he's not really asking life questions. What's really funny is, like I said, my elder 2 are from a previous marriage, and I was showing them Mrs. Doubtfire. I hadn't seen Mrs. Doubtfire in quite a long time, and I guess I forgot just how much of a story of divorce it really is. And I was watching the movie with them, and there's multiple scenes when Robin Williams is talking about his ex-wife, is talking about Sally Field, and there's a scene when the kids come over to his apartment for dinner for the first time, and he gets very upset because like he's feeling insecure about his new living situation, and he blames their mom and he blames Sally Field, and he hasn't taken the lesson like, oh, I need to change yet, and he misses
Mhm.
them and he just wants to be with them, and then she shows up to get them, and he says a lot of things that frankly I have thought and said about my own situation in the past, and I'm watching them and I was getting uncomfortable a little bit
Mm-hmm.
And they're watching this scene and several scenes. And then we paused it. It was time to go to bed. It was like 9 o'clock. And I was like, do you guys have any questions about anything that you just saw as it pertains to divorce or anything? And they were like, no, good night. They just were watching it and loving the entertainment. They loved them. So
And they
they were,
probably understood it, but had already processed those feelings.
yeah, probably. And then they were just watching it and just enjoying it as a movie. My daughter, we watched Devil Wears Prada, and she has now since watched that movie like four more times on her own. She just loved
Mm-hmm.
it. And she and I talked about how Adrian Grenier's character in that movie is horrible. He's a horrible character
Mm-hmm.
because he's so demeaning to her and
Mm-hmm.
so doesn't want her to have her own success and her own. She has this drive and this
Mm-hmm.
aspiration, and he's this albatross kind of
Mm-hmm.
trying actively to hold her back from. He feels like she's turned her back, she's a sellout, and
Mm-hmm.
how dare you achieve this success. And she was like, yeah. So I was trying to make her realize, and she came to the conclusion on her own too, a woman can have a backbone and aspirations of her own and should not be held back by a man or a boyfriend treating her like in this very narcissistic way that all she really needs is him. Why are you going out and doing all this stuff when I'm here for you
Mm-hmm.
in our apartment? And she was like, yeah, he sucks. Like she was like, yeah, he's a villain. She, I think, has, even when my wife is watching Gilmore Girls with her, she's like picking up those same
Yeah.
lessons as those two are navigating life.
Yeah, one of my early interviews was with Emily Ziff Griffin, and
Yeah,
she talks a lot about these great conversations she has with her daughter watching Gilmore Girls and then Riverdale. Her daughter's a little bit older, and talking about the characters' journeys and whether someone is a good parent or not a good parent. And I think it's an amazing tool to have these conversations that are such big, important conversations and much easier to have when they're on other characters than
totally.
themselves.
I completely agree. My wife told me just last night, she was like, I love watching this show with her because we really bond, but then we talk about it and we talk about life. And now the term she has a bad picker of men is now something that she understands. And I think it's allowed specifically her to grow. Hugh's an incredibly smart boy. And they both are. Just we haven't really had that opportunity for the things that we're watching to be able to have those conversations because it's been a lot of popcorn. But now that we're watching and are going to watch more deeper things, I bet those conversations will come up.
And then boys and girls look at life very
Yeah,
differently.
yeah. He gets very affected. He's incredibly sensitive. And when a mother dies or a parent dies in a movie, he almost has to stop watching. A few years ago, we put on Babe, and Babe, I think the mom pig dies at the beginning or something happens. Like he broke down in tears and couldn't continue watching it. And then one of the most visceral scenes in Close Encounters is when Miranda Dillon's son, Barry, the little cute blonde kid, gets abducted and taken
Mhm.
away. And she is just wrecked. And it's such a viscerally terrifying scene. And I could see him getting like really emotional about it.
Yeah.
And we should have talked about it, but we didn't.
There's always time. There's always
Exactly. We're
time.
still watching it. We still have like 45 minutes to go.
Yeah. So, when it's over, then we could go back and revisit
Exactly.
those feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I'm like, very curious about your list as it expands and how that goes. One of the things, if this podcast takes off, I would love to partner with a rooftop cinemas or something to create like a way for kids to connect to cinema and like before the evening cinema happens and at more kid-friendly hours.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I miss going to the cinema. I think post-pandemic and then having a kid, I still don't feel like I get to go as much as I would like and trying to get that. Because you had mentioned you went a lot with your friends in high school. And I feel like if we don't cultivate a community for our kids to experience it with their peers, they're not going to like movies in the same way we did.
I agree. And they've had like birthday parties with friends when they've gone to the movie theater. And so they're starting to. I think it'll only carry forth and take off more as they both get older. I think 3 days before COVID lockdown, we went to go see Knives Out at a theater. And I realized, like, God, like 2 years in, I was like, that was the last fucking movie we saw in a movie theater was Knives Out. And it's so nice to be able to go back and movies. Going to see Everything Everywhere All at Once in the theater was such a joy. It wouldn't have been the same just sitting and watching it on TV.
I think the first one I went to see, which was late because I had such a young child, was my first time really getting a sitter, or second time getting a sitter was going to see a PGA screening of Don't Worry, Darling.
Oh, yeah.
Which like was an enjoyable cinema experience. I think
Sure.
better to see on a screen.
One of my favorite recent, it was also like right before lockdown, was going to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at the Alamo Drafthouse. Was just awesome. I love that theater downtown. It's incredible. Have you been there?
I have not. I've been to an Alamo Drafthouse in Austin,
Right,
like
the original.
when I was at South by, and then I've gone in New York, but I haven't been to the ones here. And in fact, when I got into the Producers Guild, I just went to every single screening ever that they invited us to, and I would just keep seeing everything as quickly as I could, and then didn't pay for as much cinema as I should have, unfortunately. Except for I'll go and buy tickets to, I went to when Wonder Woman came out with a bunch of girlfriends. We all went together to, and as much as I can to support filmmakers that aren't traditionally supported, it's when I really make sure I go out opening weekend and buy a ticket. But I haven't gotten back into that trend again, which I have to start doing. I was thinking about maybe when we're on daycare spring break. So I have a nanny right now, and it's pretty difficult because it's not his normal routine.
Yeah. What was the first movie that you showed your son? I know he's young still.
We've been doing more shorter form still, but when he recently had an ear infection, I put on Cars. And he was like in and out of it. Like he couldn't quite sit through the whole thing, but he does. We'll watch like 3 or 4 episodes of Trash Truck now and just be like, more.
That's Bluey in our house. It's Bluey. And Cars is on loop right now.
Yeah.
There's little short Cars shows too.
Oh, I should try
on
that.
Disney Plus. They're like 6 minutes long.
I've been doing, because I've been trying to do content that is slower. If I can help it, ever going to show him like a Coco Melon. That's just 1, annoying, and 2, bad for his brain. So I try to do as much like reading story time as I do screen time, but I love watching stuff. So I'm like, really want to get him obsessed with story and story worlds and all of that stuff.
By the way, if you're not watching Bluey, it's amazing.
I've watched a couple episodes with him because I spoke with Emily Best, who runs Seed and Spark, and she's told me that Bluey is like genius television.
It's great. It's great.
So we watched a few episodes, but he's still just not quite getting into the concepts of it just yet. So
Blue's Clues is always good too.
Yeah. I want to go back to Rainbow Connection also.
I know. By the way, like we do not watch Sesame Street, and that's because the new ones are so frantic and annoying. But the old ones were great.
The original ones are on HBO Max. So I did show him some of the original ones. But I made the mistake. I'm trying to get rid of the pacifier. And they have an Elmo episode about saying bye-bye to the pacifier.
I've seen it.
And he is sucking on the pacifier harder than ever.
It terrified him.
I was like, we're going to take the pacifier out so I can understand you. No.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like my oldest was addicted to the pacifier. Catherine never was. She instead sucked her thumb. Loved the pacifier. We had to cut the tips. That's a trick, by the way. Do you know that trick?
Oh, no.
Snip the tip of it, and he will not like it anymore, and he will just throw it. And we snipped the tip of his pacifier to the point that like after one night he was like and then he was done with it.
I'm going to ask you my last question to wrap us up, which is, what movie do you recommend I show my son Miles to make him a cinephile? And it can be at any age.
I think the one that always has an impact, at least on my kids, when I've showed it to them early, is Back to the Future.
Okay.
It's funny. It's got such an interesting dynamic plot that I think makes their head spin a little bit. This notion of a time machine, like Catherine for 2 years, all she wanted for Christmas was a time machine. And I think it's just one that, as an introduction to a movie that is not a cartoon, we've introduced that one early. and I think it's the right length. Michael J. Fox is so damn good in that movie. Doc Brown is like a cartoon character. So it's always been, at least for the four of mine, an entry.
At 4 or earlier?
I think it's been around like 3 or 4.
Okay.
It's been like the test to see if they could sit through a live action movie, and it's always worked. What other answers have you gotten for that?
I've gotten E.T.
Yeah, that's one.
Some Like It Hot,
That's a
but
great
older.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some Singing in the Rain, and Jurassic Park is another one, and a lot of Spielberg stuff. Yeah, and then some people are just like whatever he's interested in, like whatever his thing is, like cars.
Cars or whatever. Yeah, I would say I would throw Star Wars in there too.
Like
as
which
always going on.
one? Like the first, like starting and
Oh, A New Hope.
okay.
Start with episode 4.
You know,
I haven't even shown them 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. I remember when I was a little girl, like that I didn't get shown certain things based on gender.
Yeah.
So like I like my brother got to see Star Wars, and I don't think my brother was so into it. So it could have also been that they're like he didn't like it, so she won't like it. So I don't think it might have not been a gender thing. But I wasn't allowed to watch horror, and I love horror films. I don't know. I like writing horror movies and half-hour comedy television. It's like a weird side of
comedy. Comedy and horror go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's the absurd, but with different timing.
Yeah, they elicit the same kind of reaction from the audience and laughs
Yeah.
and scares. But yeah, I think those would be my first, and traditionally here have been Goonies too. Jurassic Park, I haven't shown them yet. I really want to. They've been scared to watch it.
Yeah, it can be scary.
Charlie, I think of all three of them, I'd have the most success showing to because he likes to be scared a little bit.
Yeah.
But a couple of years ago, like Catherine was obsessed with watching Jaws. She was like 6, and all she wanted to watch was Jaws, 6 or 7. And I was like, I don't know, but okay. So one day I put Jaws on, and she watched about half of it through this. Hugh had to leave the room, and then I paused it at some point. I'm like, "Are you okay? Do you want to keep watching?" She was like, "No, I got to get out of here." She had been obsessed with the idea of this shark, but then it's the error of her ways. Pretty quickly, she was terrified.
Beach days become challenging, huh?
Exactly. Indiana Jones too.
Yeah. There was a dinosaur trash truck episode. He just started that. I stopped Miss Rachel after I heard some criticism around the addictiveness of it because it helps you speak and whatnot. But I was like, it's a good one if I have to shower.
Just pop it on and let him watch it. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I'll try it.
It's really for young.
Yeah.
But it helps with speech, and she's like a early education teacher. But he follows the emotional journey. He'll cry out like upset and then be happy the next minute, or the trash truck will leave the screen and he's like more, and then the trash cup will come back, and so he like really gets into it.
Cute. It's amazing. Yeah, I'll be like cooking dinner and hear Hudson in the other room going, "Be careful, Lightning McQueen. Be careful." He's seen it like 1,000 times, but he's still worried about it.
So cute. This has been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out. I've been looking forward to this. This was definitely a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.